Hello everyone and welcome back to another brand new edition of Kavam. Of course you must know by now, but if not, it's a Doctor Who podcast where we talk all about Doctor Who, Blu-rays, DVDs, special features, the physical media releases of Doctor Who. This week, of course, we've had the release of Evil of the Daleks in animated form, and we're going to be getting well into discussing the animation, whether, how well it came out, the story. We're going to discuss the special features. We're going to got everything covered on that release for you all. Plus, of course, we've got to talk about the exciting news about RTD coming back, and a few of the more maligned Doctor Who stories may also get a bit of discussion later in this podcast. But joining me, as always, today is Ryan and Charlie. Guys, how are you getting on?
I'm doing well, thank you. I definitely, now that we've got Evil of the Daleks, I think we're definitely all good. Isn't that right, Charlie?
Yeah, I think Evil of the Daleks was definitely a nice change of pace from the Web of Fear animation.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was after the concern and disappointment of the Web of Fear, we definitely went back to a more positive, I think, animation and more positive release to enjoy. Of course, we're gonna come to that in a lot more detail. Apologies, I'm listening for my voice. I'm just got a bit of a cold, so you might not hear as much from me, and my voice is a little bit off. But yes, a week ago, hopefully, as you're listening to this, obviously you all listened to it the day it was released. Of course you do, on the Monday, because you're all great, devoted fans of the podcast. Of course you are. But of course, a week ago we got the Evil of the Daleks release, animation being released. The story from the end of season 4 that previously had 6 missing episodes and only 1 existing out of the 7 episodes. But now we've had all 7 of them animated in full colour or black and white, whatever you prefer, for us to all enjoy. And well, Charlie, you've had the chance to watch all 7 episodes. Firstly, how did you decide to watch it? Did you watch the colour, the black and white with the existing episode? How did you go about doing it? And what were your kind of initial thoughts on the animation?
So I watched it with the color. I usually watch it with the color first time so I can get the sort of full experience. And as for how they went about the color, I think it was actually really really quite subtle in a way. Like they didn't try to be too creative with colors, and it was definitely better than, say, Power of the Dalek Standard Edition. But yeah, I went with the color. And as for the existing episode, I watched the existing episodes of episode 2 followed by the animated, just to see what the animation of that episode 2 is like as well.
Yeah.
And as for the animation, yeah, it was fantastic. Like, as lots of people thought, it would be just as good as Faceless Ones and Macra Terror, and I'd say it is as good as those, if not better. I think it was absolutely fantastic. I feel they did quite well considering the amount of characters and sets in this. Like, there are a lot of them, especially the scenes on Skaro. I think are really, really fantastic. It was a bit iffy in places. Like, there were a few things that did seem a bit strange, but with what they did, it's very impressive. They managed to do 7 whole episodes. So yeah, and it's just a genuinely really good story to back that all up. Yeah, probably my favorite animation release so far.
Yeah, exactly. I think most fans have tended to, the reception has certainly been very positive about the animation. And Ryan, did you go down the same route of the colour version, or did you go black and white to start off the viewing?
I went with the black and white first because I feel like, well, considering that the 60s Doctor Who was made and designed to be in black and white, I decided that would probably be the best option first. And so I watched the black and white, and I did watch the existing part 2 before I watched the animation. Again, just as kind of compared. It's kind of like how I approached the Faceless Ones. I watched the existing episode before the animation. So I pretty much took the same route with Evil of the Daleks. And then I watched the colour version afterwards, and I will admit I'm never usually much when it comes to the colour versions, but I will admit they did a really good job with the colour version. I think it's just as good as the black and white. They're pretty much on par. And as far as the animation is concerned, it's definitely my favourite animation to date. I think they did an excellent job with it. I really wanted this to be the best one because I love Evil of the Daleks. It's one of my favourite Dalek stories, and I really wanted to see it done justice. And I feel like they have done pretty much just about across the board, really. I feel like they did such an excellent job of capturing the sets of the Victorian period, and then moving as soon as the action moves to Skaro. I feel like they did such a phenomenal job of capturing that sort of that mood, that atmosphere, and the stuff in the control room with the Emperor was just so incredibly well done that I'm just I'm just really just blown away by it. Yep, definitely the best one so far.
Yeah, I certainly tend to agree. I think I mean I watched the color version of it, albeit I did drop in the existing episode 2, and I didn't actually watch. Well, I skimmed through the animated episode 2, and it's clear that there were some big differences when you compared the existing episode to the animated version for episode 2. You had I remember the sweeping shot around the house as you first arrived in the Victorian house. Like, that's completely different to the existing episode, where it's just a shot sort of in that little room of the house, whereas we actually get to see the whole exterior of it first, which I think makes quite a big difference in enhancing your sort of perspective on it. And it was interesting for me because in the past, with stories where we have a mixture of animated episodes and existing episodes, I usually sort of sit through each of the animated episodes waiting for the existing one. So, like with the Faces ones, I went, I've had episode 1, we watched the existing, then episode 2, I'm sitting through episode 2 just waiting to get back to an existing one in episode 3. But with this story, I actually was sitting through the existing episode 2 just being like, I just want to get back to the color animation. It's so great. Like, I genuinely was more like engrossed in the story through the animation than I was through that singular existing episode. I know it's only 1 out of 7, so I kind of, you get more used to the animation, but even in that early part of the story, I really just felt like I was able to connect with the animation that much more, and it really felt like I'd watched the story. Whereas with some animations, it very much feels like I've just kind of, I don't know, I've watched a sort of poorer version of it that I can't really kind of buy into quite as much. Whereas I really felt like I've seen Doctor Who: The Evil of the Daleks now. It almost doesn't matter if the episodes come back or not. Like, I've seen this story and I really, that I've experienced it now. And I just haven't felt that with previous animation. So I don't know quite what it was that made it that good. And the animation was definitely the best we've had of the range so far, I think, as you say, up there with the Macroterra and the Faceless ones, probably just that little bit better. And just being able to work with, as you said, Charlie, so many different sets, from the airport, the beginning of the story, through the Tricolor, to the Victorian house, to Skaro, all these different defined locations that were so, there's no crossover between them at all. The antique shop as well, obviously, and just being able to create so many of these sets was so impressive, and then the same with the characters as well. I really do think it was a triumph, really, for the animation range. I mean, Charlie, looking at kind of the animation itself, do you think there's any kind of specific areas that particularly enhance the story, just in the kind of freedom of being able to do what you like with animation? Do you think that helped the story in any places?
Definitely in episode 6 and 7, I think. The scenes in Skaro, I think, definitely really helped capture the sense of scale and epicness, like especially the whole battle between the human factor Daleks and the Black Daleks, I think, was just so epic. And I can imagine what it would have looked like had it been live action, but I think I still would have preferred the animated version, purely because it can just... it can be, it can look like it would have had a higher budget than it did. It looks like it could have been more epic and grandiose, and it just and with the Emperor Dalek as well, he's animated fantastically, like one of the best animated characters in all of the animation so far. It's just just the scenes on Skaro, especially when the whole city was like exploding and things. It was it just really enhanced the sense of scale, and the whole concept of the final end of the Daleks really properly felt more real.
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, this story, I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about when we talk about the making of documentary, but with this story was sort of intended, for most of the production at least, to be the final Dalek story. And so we get that big climactic scene on Skaro, as you say, which is just so enhanced by animation. And as good as some of the little clips from like the model shots and things look, I still don't think it would quite, just because it was the 1960s, they didn't have the budget to do it as well. They were using models and things. It just probably wouldn't quite live up to the scale and the excitement and just the chaos, really, of that final episode, in large part. And I just think that sort of establishing shot of Skaro that we get when we first arrive there, this sort of red barren, this red city, basically, I thought was so impressively realized, and just I could picture like the original Dalek city from the Daleks, and obviously it looks a little bit different, but I just, they use that sort of similar shot from up on the cliffs, I think, to what we see in the Daleks, which I think is such an effective way of linking it back and really making us believe that we're on Skaro, that I think is a great success for this. And so Ryan, how do you think that the animation sort of in the mid episodes of this story, I feel like it kind of slows down a bit. I don't know, maybe like when we get the stuff with Jamie going around with what's the chap's name again? Kemmel, that's it. Yeah, I feel like that is kind of the slow part of the story. Do you think the animation did a good job of kind of not making that bit too slow and dull? Because I feel like, particularly if you're watching maybe the recon of that, I feel like it could really grind to a halt through sort of episode 3 and 4.
Yeah, listening to the audio, it did feel like it was kind of I wouldn't say with the whole test with Jamie, I wouldn't necessarily call it a bad sequence. I would be lying if I said I flat out hate it. It's just a bit drags on a bit too longer than it should do, and I didn't really feel that watching the animation. I feel like watching the animation, it does keep that momentum up. It does help keep the pace flowing along, which I suppose it wouldn't get the sense of that if you only listened to the audio. So I feel like the animation did a much better job at making that whole Jamie rescuing Victoria sequence have a good pace and a good momentum to it, which perhaps was lacking in just the audio version.
Yeah, exactly. And I believe they did also, in places, and particularly I think like in the fight scene between Jamie and Kemmel, they cut that down a little bit from what the original version was, simply to try and improve the pacing of it a little bit. And because because obviously Kemmel doesn't talk, there's quite long sections of just dead air where, there's really very little sound. And so it's probably quite difficult to animate anything interesting to when you just haven't got that dialogue to kind of go alongside it. So I'm sure that was sort of a challenge as well, which, as you say, I think they did a reasonable job of being able to kind of cover up and help speed along. But yeah, I think it's just the nature of that scene really, that it just made it a bit harder, just drags along. But I feel like that's all, anything past a 4-parter in Doctor Who has some padding in it at some point, and this is kind of that part of it for this story. Then so Charlie, looking at the characters of Eve of the Daleks, I feel like in general they were pretty well realised. Kind of, obviously we've had the Doctor and Jamie before. I feel like Victoria was the one character who didn't quite have such a good likeness compared to maybe the Doctor and Jamie. And they clearly struggled in the Web of Fear as well. Obviously a very different animation style, but that I thought also was particularly poor. I don't know. How do you feel like in general the likenesses of the characters were kind of transferred over into animated form in this story?
I mean, I can imagine that, let's say for the Second Doctor, he's very hard to get the likeness of, because he does have quite a distinctive appearance. He doesn't really look very generic, so it's probably quite hard to animate him. But I think they've done reasonably well. Like, it wasn't too far from the style of the Faceless Ones. With Jamie, the same. It was basically the Faceless One style. As for Victoria, she does look a lot different to lots of her other animated counterparts, but I think they did quite a good job, really, considering how many characters they had to animate. Like, you got Victoria's dad, you got Max de Bull, you've got like 3 other, Victorian guys in that house. Mm. You got Kemmel, you got the Daleks, obviously. There's so many to animate that I am willing to excuse it slightly if Victoria isn't 100%, if her likeness isn't 100%.
Yeah, totally. As you say, I think it can be excusable, particularly given the amount of characters in a story like this, which in many ways is a very positive sign that they've been able to go about animating a story that simply does have the scale that it does and does have the amount of characters that it does, given in the past they've talked about the difficulty of filming, of animating stories with a larger cast or sets, stories like The Crusade or Marco Polo, or I guess Master Plan as well to an extent. They've always said, we're not so sure about those because they've got too many sets or too many characters. Well, they've done a lot in this story, so I feel like it's over time we should get to a point where they're able to do it. I think, as often is the way with these sort of stories, I feel like the Daleks are probably one of the most effectively animated sort of, characters of the animation. I feel like the Daleks really lend themselves to being animated. And clearly, you know, people like Rob Ritchie, who's been doing these Dalek animations for like 10 years and working on all of the animations more recently, they really know how to do them really, really well. So Ryan, do you think that like the actual Daleks themselves, and you know, we had the sort of the fun, you know, the different Daleks as well, the playing the sort of childlike Daleks we get as well, which is a really fun part of the story. Do you think that they were all, you know, particular strengths when we look at the animated side of this story?
Absolutely. It really just as good, if not slightly better than the animation from the special edition of Power of the Daleks. It feels like it's definitely on that level. They got the movements of these particular Daleks just right. And especially I was very curious to know how they were going to animate the human factor Daleks, how they would just sort of show their sort of childlike quality to them. And I feel like they did a really good job of capturing that. And as Charlie mentioned, the Emperor Dalek, especially, I thought was definitely the most impressive in terms of all the Daleks animated, because I was very curious to know how they were going to do the Emperor, considering he's the main Dalek in this entire story. And I feel like they did such an excellent job of handling that.
Yeah, and I read a really good story. I can't remember who. I think I saw it on Twitter or something. But that essentially the obviously there's the creative decision in the animation of having the kind of leader Daleks of the different sort of groups who are all sort of, you know, positioned in front of the Emperor Dalek there as a sort of, I don't know, defense or I don't know quite what. And someone was, you know, comparing that to Passing of the Ways, where there's a very similar, they're floating obviously around the Emperor, but you've got that similar nature of the Daleks floating around the Emperor. And that wasn't in the original script of Leave of the Daleks. So it's like the inspiration for going back to the animated version of the original story is from the newer version of a story featuring the Dalek Emperor, which I thought was a really just fun way that it's kind of like Doctor Who influencing itself to kind of come back to the past and create something from the future to affect a past story. I think it's really, really fun. Just something I sort of noted there.
And funny enough, I think with the Emperor, I think the Big Finish audio dramas has sort of confirmed that the Emperor Dalek from this story is the same one from Parting of the Ways.
Okay, yeah.
Apparently, even though the Emperor got destroyed, somehow this time strategist Dalek went back and sort of messed around with the multiverse and brought the Emperor Dalek, that specific Emperor, back and had that be the leader of the Daleks during the Time War, which I think was a nice concept. That it's still that Emperor, but just more powerful and more elevated.
Yeah, I like to think it's the same one. What Big Finish story was that it came from? Do you know?
I think it was the Paul McGann Time War Volume 4. I think the story was that they create this clone copy of Davros, these faction of Daleks, to kind of keep the Daleks going along, since they lost the original Davros during the Time War. Well, supposedly. I mean, still on Earth.
And then he just turns up again, yes.
And the time strategist didn't like that, and so it went back and sort of found the original Emperor from these different multiverses and sort of brought him back and made him more powerful. Okay,
I see. And that's how we ended up with the Dalek Emperor. Returning for Passing the Ways, obviously. And I think it's really great that, you know, you have that picture of that link between the characters, 40 years apart from when the actual stories themselves aired. I think that's really, you know, a great way to go about doing it. And it's just nice to see the influences of the future affecting the past again in a way as well. So as a story, let's talk about Eve of the Daleks as a story for a second here, because I feel like in general it's a very highly regarded story. Obviously, we've addressed how the middle part isn't, you know, quite as good as maybe the start and the end of the story. But Charlie, what's your kind of, I don't think you'd seen this story particularly, well, I know none of us have seen it before, but you hadn't really particularly consumed this story before. So what was your take on the actual story itself after watching this animation?
It's pretty fantastic, really. I mean, I can't really dispute it is one of the best Doctor Who stories ever. Definitely one of the best Dalek stories ever. I'd say it's only beaten by Genesis, and that's like a maybe, you know, Genesis and Remembrance possibly as well. It's definitely among the top 3 Dalek stories. I've actually got a ranking of all of the classic stories I've seen so far on my phone, and looking at where I added it, 6th place. So yeah, and I've seen about 110, so that's pretty good.
Nice.
Yeah, it does drag in the middle, and that's why it's not any higher, because it genuinely would be like top 3 had it not been for that slightly slower bit in the middle from like parts 4 to in the middle of part 5, it does drag a bit there. Although I do enjoy Kemmel as a character, considering he has no lines pretty much. It's quite good. And yeah, absolutely. Like the 2 episodes on Skaro are like some of the best individual episodes of Doctor Who ever made. They're really fantastic.
Yeah, I think that I was almost kind of, because I couldn't remember exactly when we got to Skaro, and I was kind of just hoping that we'd get there a bit earlier than the last 2 episodes of the story, because I feel like, as great as it is, all the stuff in the Victorian house, I feel like when you know you're going to get to Skaro towards the end of the story, you kind of just want to get there because you've got loads of Daleks, you've got this alien planet. It's just a really, really exciting, aspect of the story. But Charlie, I think the question the listeners are all asking right now is, what is number 110 on your list of stories?
Time Lash. I've very recently seen it. Yeah, it's not good.
And I believe that's something we're going might be discussing a little bit later in the podcast. So stick around if you want to hear a bit more of Charlie's thoughts on not a classic. But Ryan, the story of Evil of the Daleks, that certainly is a classic, as Charlie has said, and certainly I agree that I think it's a really, really strong one. I think the fundamental idea of the Daleks kind of looking basically, well, seemingly looking to the humans for an idea of how to make themselves even better, and then obviously pulling the twist towards the end of the story as well. I think that's just a great idea and something really unusual and a bit unique that they actually did with the Dalek, because with the Daleks as characters, because I feel like it's so, with more and more Dalek stories getting written, it becomes harder and harder to actually write an original story about the Daleks that's actually not just, Daleks invading this planet or whatever and having an actual angle that's interesting on it. I felt like Evil really kind of hit that mark. Did you kind of see the same in that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Evil of the Daleks is a really good companion piece to Power of the Daleks, because both of these stories do different things with the Daleks. Because with Power, you see the Daleks at their most manipulative, pretending to be these servants, and just so that they could find a way of rebuilding themselves and duplicate themselves. And then with Evil of the Daleks, you see like them trying to find new ways of adapting, as it seems, by trying to look for the human factor. But then, of course, they pull that twist towards the end. It's really to show how more important the Dalek factor is, and then also introducing the Emperor for the first time. So it's like these 2 stories have done interesting new things with the Daleks, and which is probably why I think they're definitely some of up there with Dalek Invasion of Earth and Dalek Master Plan as the best Dalek stories of the 60s, because they're just so unique. And Evil of the Daleks does feel, if this had been the last Dalek story, I mean, I'm grateful that we've got all the Dalek stories since then, with Genesis of the Daleks, Revelation, and some of the stuff with Modern Doctor too. But if this had been the Daleks' last story, I think it would have been a good story to go out on, because obviously the first Dalek story is set on Skaro, and this is a good bookend. It ends on Skaro, the last one. So I feel like it's got a nice, it feels like a good bookend to this Dalek saga throughout the 60s. And yeah, I just think it's a really damn good, solid Dalek story. And in terms of ranking it among the Patrick Troughton stories, it's probably my 4th or 5th favorite Troughton story out of his entire run.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly right up there for me as well. I would probably put the War Games and the Invasion ahead of it, but apart from that, I can't think of many more. I still, even watching this animation, I still can't decide whether I prefer Power of the Daleks or Evil of the Daleks. I feel like they're both just brilliant stories, with, as you say, Ryan, so much just actually unique ideas to be done with the Daleks, which both, we get both of them in the separate story, which I think is really what rates them so highly. So I don't think I'm ever going to be able to make that decision. Well, I will one day when I have to do a ranking of Dalek stories or something. Then I'll decide which one is higher. But I'm going to put them on an even keel at like number 3 of the Troughton era. I think is probably the best way to put it. But yeah, overall, guys, where do you think this animated, and the animation of this story is the best we've seen so far from the animation range? All the way back to 2006. We did a podcast on it a couple of months ago discussing all of them. Do you think this has topped the lot, or do you still think that, say, Macra Terror or The Faces one still slightly tops it? I don't know, Charlie. Where's it sitting for you?
If I'm being honest, I don't know whether this is better than Macra Terror or just on the same level, because I do think Macra Terror was absolutely fantastic. I feel like it replicated 3D animation in in such a way that this, Evil of the Daleks didn't do. Whereas I do think Evil of the Daleks handle color better, and it's generally looks a bit better because of a higher budget. So if I'm being honest, kind of like you were saying with ranking all the Dalek stories, I'll just put them on the same level for now. But if I have to do an animation ranking, I'll do a rewatch.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, you mentioned there, Charlie, the color in this story. Like, I kind of agreed with you that I think the color, whereas in some of the animations, the color I don't think is quite fitted that well. Of clearly, the original Power of the Daleks was the most obvious one, but then that was never meant to be color anyway. But more recently, I feel like it's worked with some. I feel like the Macra Terror, it worked really effectively. But with the Faceless ones, I feel like the black and white version, it lent slightly more towards. Maybe that's just because there was existing episodes of it. But I felt like the color version really just fit the nature of the story, fit the atmosphere of the story. And, particularly the stuff on Skaro as well, that kind of dark blue sort of hue that was kind of across pretty much all the scenes on Skaro. It just felt, there was a real ominous feeling of the fact we're on this kind of dark planet, this evil planet, really, where the Daleks are. And just using that sort of color grading, I felt was really, really effective and actually enhanced the story over maybe a black and white version of it. I don't know, where did you kind of think that black and white versus color, how it sort of sat there?
Definitely, I would probably prefer the color. Like I said, I haven't actually seen the black and white version of the story yet. I mean, I have seen the existing episode 2 in the past, and I have seen it, when I did the rewatch. Yeah. But I do think I prefer color for that episode at least. And like you said, I can imagine the dark bluish hues do lend themselves better to this story rather than black and white. And much like with the animation, it allows them to do things like create this further sense that Skaro is this very dark planet, and you really feel like you are on the Dalek planet. I was going to say Planet of the Daleks, but that's Spyridon. And like you were saying about color, I do think that if there's one good thing about Web of Fear, I do think Web of Fear Special Edition actually handle color somewhat okay.
Yeah, that's very true. Actually, I think the color saved the animation to it. Well, didn't save it; it still wasn't very good, but it made it slightly less worse than the black and white version. Maybe I don't know, Ryan. What was your perspective on the black and white and the color? I know you watched the black and white one first. Do you feel like that's the best way to view this story, or do you feel like the color can also add something to it?
I don't know, to be honest, because when it comes to 60s Doctor Who, I always go for the black and white because that is kind of 60s Doctor Who for me. It's because black and white does give a lot of mood and atmosphere to those sort of stories. But in the case of this particular animation, I think somehow they managed to make the color version just as good as the black and white version. So in a way, they're both really on par because even in the color, as Charlie mentioned, they do manage to capture that mood, that atmosphere, especially when it's on Skaro with the dark blues and the dark shadows. They somehow, even in color, they managed to still keep that atmosphere, which I was worried that it was going to lose with the color, but somehow they didn't lose that. So yeah, they're definitely more on par for me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I in the past have tended to go for the black and white one. I think I watched the color version of Macra Terror, but I definitely watched the black and white Faceless ones, and I felt like that was the right version for that animation. But then watching this, it just felt like the color version really just helped me to enter into the story that bit more that maybe the black and white wouldn't have done. I mean, I'm sure at some point I will watch the black and white version. I feel like maybe when I do an actual marathon through that period, I'm more likely to watch the black and white one just to fit in with the era rather than watching it as its sort of one-off own thing, where I feel like the color version is more maybe more engaging. I don't know. I think it depends what mood you're in, doesn't it, really? Nothing much more than that. But Ryan, overall, what's your perspective on both the story and the animation? Do you think this has been a great success of a release?
Absolutely. As I've always sung Evil of the Daleks praises in the past, and I still think it's a phenomenal story. As far as the animation goes, I actually think it's the best animation so far. I mean, Macra Terror and the Faceless ones come a very close second, but somehow this has managed to top all of them just because of how much they've improved the animation. I mean, I think this is the same animation studio that have done both versions of Power of the Daleks, Shada, Macra Terror, and Faceless ones. And you could just see the clearly see that it was all sort of building up to this. Like this was going to be their. It feels like they were building up to this being their crowning achievement, and it certainly was their crowning achievement. I feel like they just did the animation better. The likenesses are better. Well, for the most part. I mean, I know Victoria's kind of, but at least I think she looked better than she did in the animation for the Web of Fear. I definitely think she looked more like Victoria in that one. And so I just feel like they just nailed it across the board as far as Evil of the Daleks is concerned. So for that, and considering they did that for one of my favorite stories, I think that for me makes it my personal favorite animation out of the lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would tend to agree. I think I would probably put this as the best of the range so far. I can't think of any that I'd really say are better than it. And it gives me real optimism for the animation range of the future. Of course, we know Galaxy 4 is coming in November, and we can reasonably be confident that Abominable Snowmen will be coming at some point as well. Clearly, the next obvious candidate would be let's do Dalek Master Plan and get that one done and out the way. Give them 2 years. Let's start now, and they might be done with it by the 60th anniversary. And then we can have a two-part release for Dalek Master Plan in the 60th anniversary year. Surely that sounds a great idea. I don't know. Well, that's what I want, but the BBC probably won't do it. They'll probably give us the Space Pirates first, won't they? Or or the Highlanders or something like that. I don't know. We'll have to wait. I mean, they're giving us Galaxy 4, so clearly they're not scared of doing the not so good Doctor Who stories.
I would definitely have that Highlanders any day over Space Pirates. Just anything but Space Pirates, please.
Well, indeed. And clearly now, this time next week we'll be discussing how the Space Pirates is getting animated in March next year or something. Now you've said this, so anyway, we shall see. Of course, also on this release was various special features. Not that many, but there are a few new things in there. I know Charlie. Which one of you was it who listened to the audiobook, the 1992 audiobook? Was it Charlie? You listened to the audiobook. So how did you listen to that before or after the animation? I should probably clarify first.
I listened to it after the animation.
Okay, so how did that kind of did that change your perspective on the story? Listening to an audio only version narrated by Tom Baker from the 90s, did that kind of give a different perspective on the story, or which one did you feel like you enjoyed more?
Well, it's very hard to compare because they're two completely different things. It's an audio version of the story narrated by Tom Baker, and then there's an actual story with visuals. So it's quite hard to compare them. But Tom Baker, he has a fantastic voice as an actor. He's sort of I've heard him been described as the British Morgan Freeman or someone, which is very much true. He's a fantastic narrator, so he does add lots to it, especially with the voices. It's really quite good. Sorry, I sort of lost my train of thought for a second. It does. I can imagine it very well, even as Tom Baker's narrating it, and it just gives it that nice little bit of charm as well, because it's Tom Baker, who was obviously a future Doctor. Lots of his character was inspired by Patrick Troughton, so it's quite interesting hearing him voice Patrick Troughton's second Doctor. But yeah, as I was saying, it's very hard to compare the two because they're so really similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
they're similar things, but in different sort of media.
Yeah, it's a very different. An audiobook versus animation is just fundamentally very different, and so it's very hard to be able to kind of give that impression. But did you enjoy the audiobook?
Oh yeah, it was great. Yeah.
I mean, if Tom Baker's doing it, it's probably going to be pretty good, isn't it? His narration's always going to add something. And so Ryan, the other kind of the main documentary of this was a fairly classic making of documentary called The Dalek Factor. A fairly straightforward name, I guess. It makes sense given the story. And I was watching this and I kind of felt like I imagined that if the DVD range had started 15 years later, that most of the kind of standard making of documentaries on the DVD range would kind of be something like this, where it's a kind of talking heads documentary, but they've gone to a location and got a Dalek. That's kind of basic. It's a fairly straightforward documentary in many ways. It's your classic, let's just tell you how they made the story with some of the people who are still alive. And let's go to a location because we've got one available. And I just felt like, there's nothing wrong with it. It's really interesting. There was lots of good anecdotes in it and everything. But I just felt like this is what most of the ones would be like if they'd filmed it 15 years later, rather than it just being some narrator in a studio and a load of, actors and a load of crew sitting in a studio as well. I feel like that getting on location helps it, but also it was just fairly a straightforward documentary. I don't know, what was your perspective? Did you feel like you learned anything new from it as well, Ryan?
I pretty much enjoyed this documentary just as much as I enjoyed the documentary from the Web of Fear. I mean, that documentary on the Web of Fear was practically the best new thing to come out of that release.
Well, yes, indeed.
And this documentary also did help provide some new things. More, I think that what helped shine a new light is more of Terry Nation sort of planning of how his own Dalek series,
Yeah.
because I mean, I've heard about it, but it seemed like he was determined to try and sell the Daleks to America to make it completely separate from Doctor Who, which I honestly don't know how he would have accomplished that, because it sounds like such a weird, bizarre idea. I mean, part of me would have liked to see what it might have been like out of morbid curiosity, but I can't imagine it would have been as good. But it seemed like he did try, and he did do a pilot script, which surprised me. He got so far as to write a pilot script for it, and it got turned down. And he tried to send it to the BBC, and they were just like, no, we're not doing that. So and it seems like he was just ready to give up and was just like, well, in that case, this will be the last of the Dalek stories, and there's going to be nothing else. But it seemed like he sort of changed his mind towards the end, which is probably why at the end of the story, one Dalek is just barely living. So
yeah, exactly. It's that fascinating anecdote where they said that they were talking to Timothy Coombe, wasn't it? Who was the guy brought in to direct the studio scenes and the Skaro stuff at the end of the story, and how he got a phone call like the day before they were going to blow up all the Daleks, saying, "No, don't blow them all up. Wait, Terry actually doesn't want to just run off with all the Daleks." And the fact that at the beginning of this story, Terry was gone. He was going to go and make a big TV show in America, and actually realised, oh wait, nobody wants that. And so instead, he's going to have to come back to the BBC, and although he didn't until the mid-70s, it was just that fascinating thing of getting to the last minute before they're about to blow all these up, and suddenly saying, oh wait, no, we shouldn't do that, which I thought was really interesting, and also stuff I never knew or didn't know that much about, to do with Shawcroft models. It's Shawcraft models, isn't it? And I didn't realise that from this story onwards they weren't doing the models or the sort of the effects for the stories anymore, having done pretty much all of it for the first 4 years of the show, and so they wanted to basically do massive explosions to prove that they could do great stuff for Doctor Who with the BBC visual effects team. So I thought that was just a really interesting anecdote as well, and it was nice to see them pushing Daleks around in the actual Victorian house that they filmed in. I thought that was a great addition to the documentary as well.
Yeah, I definitely liked that. I mean, seeing the proper Daleks that in that house as it is now, I mean, seeing those props, it just brought back memories of the Peter Capaldi story, The Magician's Apprentice and The Witcher's Familiar, which is still one of my personal favourites of all time. Because,
same here.
And how it combines all the different models of Daleks throughout the ages. It just sort of brought back memories of that, and we had showed Skaro properly in that Capaldi two-parter. It's the same Skaro designs as the ones from the 60s, which I definitely was very much appreciated. And also, this is slightly off topic, but that audio drama, Big Finish audio drama I mentioned earlier, that brought back the Emperor in this Time War audio.
Yes.
There's even a little bit of a Dalek civil war at the end of that story, where Davros might have to get some Daleks on his side, so his Daleks are against the Emperor's Daleks. I just feel like a nice little bit of evil, the Daleks' little touch there.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's a great way to do it. I love that. Yeah, that's a really good nod, actually, isn't it? Yeah, that's really good. Brilliant. Yeah, well, overall, that documentary I thought was, a solid explanation of the story, of the making of the story, really. I think it showed that in many ways it was one of the more straightforward sort of production-wise of a Doctor Who story. Like, there wasn't, some big disaster. I'm sure there was this concerns about blowing up the Daleks at the end of the story, but apart from that, they went there, they filmed it. It was intriguing, actually, that they actually filmed in the Victorian house. And, a lot of that would usually be constructed as sets, but they decided, well, for a lot of that to actually use the house itself, which I just thought was quite, a bit of a surprise. I didn't realise that about the story, so I thought that was quite an interesting point as well.
I like the fact that they used actual location footage, actual locations for the story, because I feel like it's all good having like sets built, but sometimes I feel like actual locations lend a lot to the story, can help give that more sense of a realisticness to it.
Yeah, totally. I always enjoy a story that's got that bit more location filming. I think it can just give so much more interest and scale and just engagement to the story. Really, I think that sometimes is so lacking in a slightly bland set in television censor that we often end up with some of the classic Who stories. And then the last thing I thought was really fun was Fraser Hines' little anecdote about hiding in a Dalek, and then them rehashing that at the very end of the documentary as well. I thought was, sure, it was a little bit cringily, reenacted, but I still thought it was just a bit of fun, to play into that little joke, because it's a classic. You can just imagine Fraser doing that kind of thing as well. It must have been great fun, and I just thought that was a really nice little moment to end the documentary on, really, as well. But yeah, so overall, that I think that was kind of the main thing. There was also a 15-minute chat with the production designer Chris Thompson that Phil Newman conducted. I think it was actually recorded in 2018. I'm not quite sure why they did it in 2018, but they did, and it nicely fitted to go on this release. And so that's another interesting aspect to it. And then apart from that, there's just the little feature showing the sort of 9 minutes or so of filming from the model sets that they did from the Skaro scenes at the end of the story, which was on the Lost in Time box set way back when, 17 years ago now. It's bonkers to think about it like that. But that one's, I think about half of that release is now defunct as well, from episodes returning and animated episodes and whatever. I feel like a lot of it you don't really need anymore, and hopefully we'll continue to work our way through getting rid of Lost in Time because we won't need it. But that just about wraps up the actual release itself. I think overall it was a great release. As we say, the animation was brilliant. A few great extra features in there as well. It brings us closer to having a complete season 4 as well, where you've only got, was it the Highlanders and a couple of episodes of Underwater Menace. I think that's pretty much it, isn't it? So you never know. Maybe they'll do one of those at some point soon. I mean, I personally wouldn't mind the Underwater Menace. I know it's not a great story, but I always remember it just being completely bizarre and wacky and ridiculous when I last watched it. So I wouldn't mind an animated version of that. I feel like it'd be a bit of a laugh, if nothing else. But of course, the other big news, not quite related to Blu-rays and things, but we've got to talk about it, is the return of RTD, announced a week or so ago now. So guys, when you first heard the news, Charlie, were you pretty pleased to hear that RTD was coming back to Doctor Who?
Well, I first saw the news. I actually looked on the chat that we have on Twitter, and I saw your message, Ryan, saying, I just heard the news that RTD is returning, and I thought, no, it isn't. It's a joke. And I searched it up, and I saw some news articles, and I thought, yeah, but there's news articles claiming the different people are the Doctor. I was so skeptical until I found the article on the BBC's website, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is actually legit. This is happening. And for the first couple of days, it just did not seem real, because obviously RTD is probably, definitely my favorite New Who showrunner. The fact that he's returning, like, even if it is just for 1 or 2 seasons, which I don't know, it's really hard to gauge at this point how long he'll be on Doctor Who for again. But I'm more excited for series 14 at this point than series 13.
Yeah, I mean, I think the BBC aren't helping with their lack of promotion in getting excited for Series 13. But yeah, as you say, I think RTD's return is certainly something that many fans are very excited about. I'm guessing, Ryan, you shared that similar sense of excitement for the future of Doctor Who. And the shock, certainly I felt, complete shock when I first read the announcement.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was too good to be true, but then I actually refreshed on that page. I'm just like, is this a fake article the BBC put on there by accident? Is this made up? But it's like, no, it's actually true. And I just couldn't be more happier. I mean, even though Stephen Moffat is still sort of my personal favourite showrunner, and that's only because of both the 50th anniversary and, of course, the Peter Capaldi era, which is still my golden age of modern Doctor Who. Even though Moffat is probably still my favourite showrunner because of that, RTD is a very close second. And so hearing this news that he's coming back for like another 2, maybe even 3 years is just beyond exciting for me personally. And I like the fact that it's not just that it's Russell RTD coming back, it's the new and improved RTD who's done dramas like Very English Scandal, Years and Years, It's a Sin, 3 phenomenal dramas which I've watched. They're all pretty much perfect across the board. It's a Sin especially, I think, is definitely, without a doubt, Russell's masterpiece. Such a phenomenal drama and so award-winning. And just hearing the stories about how it was an absolute struggle for him to get that drama made and selling it to a studio who just didn't want to take it on, which is just ludicrous of them, but
Mm.
they managed to do it. It's so unbelievable, and I'm just so happy that he's now given another chance to do Doctor Who again. And hearing this news, as Charlie said, it's definitely got me more excited for his new era than I am about this last year of Jodie Whittaker, because just seeing I mean, I've noticed this with each Chibnall season. I feel like in terms of promotion and hype and marketing and all that, it's just diminished less and less with each season, to the point where for this last series, I feel like there's pretty much been little to no marketing for it, which, apologies for putting my tinfoil hat on here, but it just feels like the BBC doesn't seem to have that much faith in Chibnall's run anymore, considering the reception the Timeless Children got. I mean, the Timeless Children, in terms of viewer ratings, in terms of viewers, it's the lowest out of all of modern Doctor Who, which is like, considering that was the finale, it's clear that something's wrong there. And so, which might explain why there's been very little marketing for Chibnall's run, and seeing it across social media, it's definitely seems like more people are exciting about what's coming in the future for RTD than they are about what's happening in this final year for Chibnall and Whittaker.
Yeah, exactly. I think that I hope that Jodie kind of doesn't get forgotten over the next year, because as much as sure we don't maybe think that much of Chris Chibnall's writing at times, I think it'd be a shame if Jodie's Doctor and her last adventures kind of get lost in the RTD hype, because I'm still hopeful there will be some good stuff in there. Even I'm not saying it's going to be great Doctor Who. It's probably not going to be a match for RTD2 when we get it in 2023 onwards. But I just hope that it doesn't lose everything, and that the BBC actually just want to promote it, because it's really not that difficult to put out a trailer, and yet they don't want to do that or tell us when it's airing or anything. And I think that's a real shame and just a real frustration.
I feel really sorry for Jodie Whittaker, especially considering she was the first female Doctor. I think she's the one I feel sorry for the most, because I feel like she could have been an excellent Doctor if she had a RTD or a Moffat guiding her. I think she would have been one of the best Doctors we could have ever gotten. And I know people tend to criticize Jodie Whittaker, but she was never the problem with Chibnall's era. The problem with Chibnall's era was Chibnall.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think just some of the decisions he's made by making that first season as bland as it was. I mean, I think that was the problem, because if you're going to restart Doctor Who, introduce it to a new audience, it seems baffling that would be the first season he would choose to do, because I feel like most of the stories of that season could have been done as comic books or novels. And then, of course, we have the Timeless Children and the whole palaver, which I do not want to get into with that, because I think I pretty much said all I have to say on that. I mean, again, to polish up, to bring out this old chestnut that from Jeff Goldblum did in Jurassic Park, he spent so much time preoccupied thinking whether or not he could. He didn't actually stop to think if he should.
Well, indeed. Yes, it's very, very true. Exactly. And I feel like for me, I will always feel that Chris Chibnall's biggest mistake was Series 11. Like, his approach and his belief of what Series 11 was supposed to be, I just don't think was right for Doctor Who in 2018 as it was at the time. And I think that's really one of the biggest things he did wrong. Sure, his episodes haven't been great across the board, but I just think the way he approached that just fundamentally didn't work. But RTD is exciting. To stay positive, we're looking forward to that part. Where knowing exactly when he's going to be back on the program is a bit vague. They said the 60th anniversary, but they didn't say a 60th anniversary special. They just said in 2023. So, I mean, my optimistic, hopeful brain wants to believe there'll be a series in like spring 23 and then the special, just because I feel like it's quite difficult to do an anniversary special and introduce a new Doctor in that anniversary special, because that's probably what they're going to have to do if they don't do any series or anything else before that. Because obviously Jodie's regenerating in this time next year in the centenary special.
I think I'm willing to guess what the plan is. They're going to have it be a full series, and the finale will be the 60th anniversary. I'm willing to take a bet that the finale of that season is going to be the 60th anniversary. And and this is slightly off topic, I really hope that for RTD's new era of Doctor Who, I really hope he has a female Doctor, because if any female Doctor can work, it's definitely under RTD.
Yeah, exactly. I'd almost say even more than Stephen Moffat, it's going to work with Russell writing it, I feel like. And, it's kind of shown with about half the cast of It's a Sin being, rumoured to be the next Doctor, I feel like, every other day I see one of them being, oh, could it be them? I know it's mainly because they've worked with Russell before, obviously, on that and some other programmes as well, like Years and Years and the likes. But yeah, as you say, I feel like he could just really do that, a female Doctor, the justice that it needs. And as I think we said before, it'd just be such a bad look for the show if they do go back to a male Doctor after just one female Doctor. But I have faith in Russell getting, no matter what he does, getting it right, which I think is the key thing here that we can be optimistic about.
Yeah, I think I've heard rumours that, again, take this with a pinch of salt, that Lydia West, who was in Years and Years and It's a Sin, she's could be a likely candidate for the next Doctor, and even the writer of Fires of Pompeii, I forgot his name, James.
Is it Moran? Murray?
Yeah,
Something like that.
It's Moran. He said he's willing to put money on Lydia West being the next Doctor, which I'm really hoping so, because having watched her in Years and Years and It's a Sin, and she was also in Moffat's Dracula as well.
Oh yeah, she was, yeah.
I think she would be a good bet for her being the Doctor. I think she would fit the part perfectly, and she was even in a Big Finish audio drama as well, so she definitely has a bit of history, Doctor.
Yeah, she's got all the connections she needs, doesn't she? But yeah, Charlie, are you overall, do you have any excitement for Series 13, or is it all very much looking towards RTD's era now?
I feel it, the general sort of pattern with like Chibnall's era, I preferred Series 12 to Series 11 quite a lot. I feel Series 11 it wasn't the right way to start the era, because it didn't feel like Doctor Who, I think. Every episode felt like filler as well. It didn't really feel like it was going anywhere. Series 12 was the exact opposite. We had the timeless children and all that. But I do think, on average, the episodes were better. And I'm hoping that with this sort of series arc format that they're doing, it will be a better season than Series 12. But the entire time I'm watching Series 13, I'll be thinking of what Series 14 will be like.
Well, exactly. And with Series 13, I wonder who is Chris Chibnall going to kill off in the first episode and then spend 5 episodes trying to figure out who it is, a la Broadchurch. No, maybe not. And I also think that the only negative of RTD returning is that we're not going to get that collection release of Series 1 anytime soon, where Russell spills the beans on the mess that was the production of Series 1, because I can't imagine he's going to come out and tell us all about that while he's the showrunner once again. So we might have to wait a few more years to get a good, candid Series 1 collection box set where they actually explain what happened that was the mess of Series 1 production.
Yeah, I think that's going to be years, maybe even decades, until a collection on Series 1 get released, considering the stories behind it, as well as some of the stuff that's come about certain actors involved during that time.
Well, indeed, yes.
It's going to be a whole other different can of worms, which makes me wonder if they'll ever really do a collection on Series 1, or if they'll just leave it altogether.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? It's obviously with the stuff that's happened with Noel and the likes, it's a more problematic series and period of Doctor Who to probably tackle than it was even 3 or 4 years ago. And I'm hopeful that they will give the new series the collection treatment at some point. I know Chris Chapman wants to do it. Like I saw him saying the other day how they wouldn't try and do making a documentary for every episode, but they'd go and do like a 3-hour documentary on the whole of Series 1 production, which I thought would be absolutely fascinating. But I can't imagine at least them waiting until they'll at least wait till the end of the Classic Who collection range, which realistically is going to be 7 years from now, and even then, I don't know whether we'll get it or not, but it's something we can hope for in the future. But somehow I think that RTD's return, the only negative of RTD's return is we might be slightly further away from something like that than we maybe would have liked. But yeah, that's the exciting news in the Doctor Who world this week. Of course, there's not really been any updates on animations or releases or collection box sets or whatever. We're still sitting and waiting for season 17 to be announced, because it's going to be, because they always leaked before they announced, and this one already has. And we know Galaxy 4 is coming. Abominable Snowman's probably coming. The season 23 box set, I believe, is getting I think it might be today, actually. I think as you listen to it, there's going to be the re-release of season 23, I'm pretty sure. I probably should have checked that, shouldn't I? I'll look it up while we discuss stuff. And I think at some point soon, we're also going to do a podcast discussing season 23, because there's some great content in there. I mean, I think it's a great season of Doctor Who, controversial opinion. And I also think that it's got some great special features on there, like the Doctor Who cookbook and the likes. There's some great stuff on there. So I can tell, Ryan, you want to say something about season 23. Go for it.
With the whole Trial of a Time Lord, oh boy. I did a rewatch of that recently because I wanted to, because it's a season that never worked for me. I rewatched it again recently, and I really went in with an open mind. I thought, I really want to get the most out of Trial of a Time Lord. I really did, and for some reason, I just don't really connect with it. I just found it frustrating, a bit very repetitive, a bit boring, kind of lackluster. Some of the reveals. I mean, I like the idea of this dark, evil duplicate of the Doctor, the Valiant, which is basically an idea that they would repeat again in Amy's Choice.
Indeed, the Dream Lord, yes.
Yeah, I really like that idea, that this was basically the introduction of that. I just wish the scenario was done much better than having to revolve around this trial, because it's like, of all the ways you could try and entrap the Doctor, to eliminate him, to make sure you're free of his positive influence and steal all of his remaining regenerations, there could have been much better ways to go around it than just do this whole convoluted thing with a trial, which was done before and done much better in Troughton's last story, The War Games. And I just feel like it just felt like a very frustrating season for me. I don't know if that's my least favourite season. It's either that or season 22, Colin's first season. Either one of the two.
Yeah, well, we're gonna. I have had a check, and the re-release is today. If you're listening to this on release date, and in the next podcast we will be chatting all about season 23 in the box set. So Ryan, make sure you get some more thoughts ready, and we'll have to watch some of the van for that and have a little chat about it. See if we can reach a point of agreement on the quality of season 23, because I don't think it's that bad. But we will go more in depth next time on that one. That'll be good fun as well. And so yeah, that's pretty much all the releases coming in the near future. Of course, we teased it earlier. One thing we have to talk about, and I feel like this should become a regular theme, really, should just be like, let's talk about a slightly terrible episode of Doctor Who every time round. And this time, of course, Charlie, you had the great pleasure of experiencing Time Lash for the very first time. Do you want to share your initial thoughts on first viewing of what I believe is generally ranked near enough the worst Doctor Who story of all time? I'm guessing, as it was 110 out of 110, it's pretty much there for you as well.
Well, yeah, I had another check. It was around 110. It's 109 stories I've watched. Okay. This is either 109th or possibly 108th above Time in the Rani.
Okay.
Wow.
There really isn't much going for it. It's just so stupid and ridiculous. It's like they thought of a load of stupid ideas, scrapped them all, and then put them into an episode. It's like it feels like a culmination of all the scrapped, bad, awful ideas from every other story put into one, and it just doesn't work. There's the weird sock puppet snakes.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
I mean, there are people who say the villain, the Borad, looks quite good, and for its time it does, but I do think it comes off as very cheesy and not at all enjoyable. It's just that there's nothing there, and sometimes you'll have like an action sequence, and then afterwards it will really awkwardly cut to the Doctor and Perry in the TARDIS squabbling over something. You just have these really random scenes of them in the TARDIS that are just so unnecessary. This could have been like, just one 45-minute episode and it still would have felt dragged. It's so much ridiculous padding in it. It's just not enjoyable. But I watched Revelation of the Daleks afterwards. That was a bit more positive.
Yes, definitely. That's the way forward. Yeah, that's the best. Well, I think that's the best 80s Dalek story. Controversial. But yeah, Time Lash, I haven't watched it for a few years, but my kind of vivid memory of that story is just how visually bland it is. Like everything is just beige and grey and dull looking. Like this, as you say, the plot is ridiculous and dull and just terrible. But it's not even like supported by some interesting visuals. Like they're not there at all either. There's nothing. There's just nothing going for it at all. I think the only thing I remember liking about it was the spoiler alert twist at the end about H.G. Wells. That's about the only interesting thing, and that wasn't too bad. But apart from that, I struggle to find any redeeming factors from Time Lash. I don't know, Brian.
Yeah, I think I rewatched this like a cut 2 or 3 months ago, and yeah, from what I remember, it was just absolutely atrocious. But then again, they brought in a writer in Glenn McCoy who was new, unexperienced, and didn't really know how to write for Doctor Who, and I think that just pretty much sums it up. The fact that they brought in these writers who, at that point, just didn't understand the show or didn't know how the formula of it really works, and it just goes to show how much trouble they went through during that period. It just reflects in this production. I mean, there's a reason why it's nicknamed Tinsel Lash, because when you do see the Time Lash itself, it just looks like a crystal climbing frame with tinsel stuck on the end of it, and that's meant to be the time vortex. And I just couldn't. Whenever it had that sequence at the beginning of, I don't know if it was the beginning or middle of part 2, but every time it just cuts to those scenes in the Time Lash, I just completely lose it. And this whole twist about with the Borad and the guy that for some reason has half a face like a hippopotamus, and then
for some reason,
there's he dies, and there's a clone of him at the end for no reason. Like, but somehow he made a double. It's just like, what? And I mean, I think in Doctor Who Magazine's 50th anniversary poll of ranking all the stories from the very beginning to Matt Smith's last one, I think this was voted the 3rd or 4th. I mean, I'm pretty sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong. The 3rd or 4th least favorite story of the entire run, with it beaten probably by, I'm guessing, Time and the Rani, Fear Her, and Twin Dilemma, which is, well, I mean, definitely good choices. I mean, I don't know if Time Lash would be my least favorite. I mean, least favorite is still Warriors of the Deep, hands down, with the two boxes, maybe a close second, but I think this might be a good solid 3rd or 4th least favorite on my list.
Yeah, it's really is some of the worst stuff of Doctor Who. Unfortunately, it was just in that season 22 that is just lacking a lot throughout the season, frankly. Apart from, as you mentioned, well, I guess Vengeance of Varys is also quite good, but Revelation of the Daleks is much more of an enjoyable story. It's full of, well, Charlie, I'm sure you can tell me more. You've seen it much more recent than me, but full of interesting ideas. Does something actually interesting with the Daleks, like we talked about, the importance of actually having an interesting new idea for the Daleks, and bringing Davros in is always a great idea as well. I don't know, Charlie, what was your perspective on Revelation?
It was a nice change in pace from Time Lash. It does feel quite different. It did feel a little bit dragged out and a bit bland in places, but and what you were saying about the best 80s Dalek story, I absolutely disagree, if I'm being honest. I think it's the worst 80s Dalek story, but if you look at its competition, it's probably very, very close behind Resurrection, but both are miles behind Remembrance.
No, fair enough. I do like Remembrance, but I don't know. I don't like it as much as everybody else does, I think. And Resurrection, I've never thought. Sure, it's a flashy Dalek story with lots of deaths and shooting, but I don't feel like it's that great a story outside of that. But that's just my perspective. And plus, I do quite like Colin as the Doctor, which I think does help when a lot of people, really don't like Colin.
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, with Revelation, I think in terms of the 380s Dalek stories, I think this is a solid second place for me. I think Remembrance is number 1, and this is slight close second. And I tend to agree with you, Elliot, that the Resurrection of the Daleks I'm not a huge fan of. Again, I rewatched that, I think, like a year or so ago, and I just remember it being just kind of a bit bored. I thought it was okay at best. I mean, I thought Terry Malloy was great as Davros, and I liked Tegan Beggs it, but apart from that, I didn't find it to be that memorable when compared to the other 80s Dalek stories. And funny enough, Revelation, was actually one of the very first Doctor Who's I've ever watched. After I watched my very first ones, which were Ark in Space and Genesis, Revelations was one of the next few I actually watched shortly afterwards, and just seeing Revelation was just like, wow, this is some of the darkest stuff ever in Doctor Who.
Yeah.
I mean, the only one that pretty much rivals this is Dark Water, Death in Heaven, in terms of how dark it is. And just seeing the shot of Stengos's head inside a transparent Dalek casing, I think is the most horrifying image in a Doctor Who story ever. I don't think nothing's ever dared to surpass that. And I'm surprised that it got away on TV at 5 o'clock, because apparently it was shown at 5 o'clock at tea time. And it's just like, I'm surprised they managed to get away with it. And watching Revelation, I thought, wow, if the rest of Colin's run is going to be this good, I'm going to be in for a treat. No, it's a shame that the rest of Colin's run wasn't as great as I was hoping it would be after watching Revelation.
Well, indeed, yes. Yeah. Sorry, go for it, Charlie.
We do have the hand-crushing scene as well in Attack of the Cybermen.
That's very true.
Yeah, there is that.
Yes, there's some.
Scene in Vengeance of Varos.
Very true. Yeah, that it's surprising that era does go quite dark. When you kind of forget some of the darker moments of that season in particular. I think season 23 not so much, but yeah, you're surprised Mary Whitehouse didn't come calling more around that time in the show. She did it in the 70s, but she clearly got bored of Doctor Who by the 80s in terms of complaining about it so much. It must have been. I don't know. Maybe that's what most people did by 1985. I don't know. Or that bit of a controversial opinion. But yeah, and I'll be interested to see when we come around to a season 22 collection box set at some point. How do they tackle Time Lash? I'm pretty sure there's a making of on the DVD, but do they feel the need to add any more meat to the bone of slating it? I feel like they'll just kind of quietly give it a new sound, to give it a 5.1 soundtrack, and let's move on. I imagine will be the run for Time Lash.
Yeah, despite it having only one documentary, it's pretty comprehensive.
Yes, I do remember it being, yeah.
I don't think there's any more they can add with that story.
Yeah,
I think with the trailers for them, I feel that usually they go for one of the best received in terms of these like quite creative trailers. Really, like we got the Sixth Doctor is on trial again, the Home Assistants of Death for series 14. We got Terror of the Autons for season 8. Even though maybe the Demons is better, but they always go with a very well received one. So I feel that they may do something similar to Vengeance on Varos for the trailer for the season 22 box set.
Yeah, that's a good shout, actually. Get Syl on there or something like that. I don't know. Do something with him, and I feel like that could work quite effectively. And I'm sure they could get Nabil back to come and do him again or something. I feel like that'd be quite fun. But yeah, I think we'll leave the slating of Time Lash there, and we'll pretty much wrap this podcast up now. So as I say, we'll be discussing season 23. So get ready for a little bit of a war of words about whether we like season 23 or not on the next podcast, or maybe we'll just focus on the document
again.
Yeah,
who knows? Maybe the 4th or 5th time watching it, maybe I'll
start to like it.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. I'm hoping so.
Yeah, so join us in 2 weeks to find out if Ryan starts liking season 23 or not. And yeah, we'll chat all about that on the next podcast. And of course, if there's any announcements of box sets or animations or anything new, you'll also be the first to hear about it here on the podcast as well. But apart from that, thank you to Charlie and to Ryan. As always, please to give us a follow on Spotify or review us on Apple Podcasts. Just keep across them on there. Or if you're watching on YouTube as well, give us a like, a subscribe on my channel and a comment. And you can always get a hold of us on Twitter at KavanPod as well for the latest news on the podcast. But apart from that, I hope you've enjoyed this one, and we'll see you again soon for a brand new podcast.